"You're just a dressed-up nobody, and my son deserves better," Carl said loud enough for the entire dining room to fall silent. The words cracked through the warm air like glass against tile. The chatter dissolved instantly, and 20-something pairs of eyes turned to me. I sat frozen at the long oak table, a fork suspended halfway to my mouth, roast duck cooling on my plate. I wasn't sure what stung more, Carl's words, or the thunderous silence that followed them. I set my fork down slowly, deliberately. My napkin followed, folded neatly next to the untouched plate. Then I looked up at the man who had just humiliated me in front of his entire extended family on his 65th birthday. "You're absolutely right," I said softly, standing. "I'm not good enough. So let me stop pretending." I turned without another word and made my way toward the grand entryway of the Richmond estate, the very mansion Carl Whitmore had been bragging about all night. The same mansion he didn't know I'd helped finance. Behind me, the room remained eerily quiet. I could practically hear Carl's wife, Lillian, holding her breath. My husband Noah, Carl's son, was somewhere behind me. Pale, stunned, wordless. Like the rest of them. Good. The Virginia night was crisp for early October. I stepped onto the marble front steps, pulled out my phone, and hit a contact saved under the name RES, my law firm, Rothman, Ellis and Sloan. "Hi, Marla," I said when the call connected. "It's Erin. I need you to prepare full withdrawal notices from the Ashcroft Park project. All capital, all contracts, every partnership. I want those signed and sent by 9 a.m. tomorrow." Marla hesitated. "Erin, are you sure? That's a $14 million investment." "I've never been more certain. Carl Whitmore just called me a nobody. It's time he finds out exactly what kind of nobody he's been depending on." I hung up. The silence around me had felt suffocating at dinner. Out here in the quiet, it felt powerful. Freeing. My Tesla beeped softly as I approached, and as I slid inside, I caught a glimpse through one of the dining room windows. Carl, arms flailing in some self-righteous explanation, still hadn't noticed what had just unraveled behind the scenes. He didn't know that the woman he had just shamed had been bankrolling his comeback project for over a year. Or that the investor he bragged about to every developer in Washington, D.C. was sitting across from him at the table, enduring his insults while single-handedly keeping his empire afloat. Tomorrow, his empire would start to crumble. My name is Erin Bennett. I'm 33 years old. I married Noah Whitmore 3 years ago thinking I was becoming part of a family legacy, a family with warmth and wealth, built on generational business success. Instead, I married into a dynasty of appearances. A family obsessed with status, perception, and bloodlines. And Carl Whitmore, the revered patriarch, was its figurehead. Carl owns Whitmore Ventures, a commercial real estate firm known for its glossy brochures and old money handshakes. What most people didn't know was that Whitmore Ventures was sinking 2 years ago. Carl was too proud to admit it, and too stubborn to ask for help. That's where I came in. Not as Erin Bennett, daughter-in-law, but as EB Partners, the alias I used to invest in struggling development firms with long-term potential. I built my firm from the ground up after earning my MBA at Kellogg. I specialize in commercial turnarounds, silent partnerships, and quiet exits. Discretion is part of the business. Noah knew I worked in finance, but assumed I was some corporate consultant. He never asked for details. And I never offered them. It suited me just fine. Especially when, 18 months ago, I quietly started investing in Carl's failing projects through shell partnerships. I funneled in $2.4 million through various fronts to save his Ashcroft Park redevelopment, a massive mixed-use complex of condos, retail, and office space, set to break ground next Monday. Carl had no idea the investor he toasted at every fundraiser was the same woman whose cooking he criticized at Thanksgiving. The same woman he just told to know her place over dry champagne and roast duck. Noah texted me that night. "Erin, please call me. Dad was out of line." I didn't know he'd say that. I didn't answer. By the time I got home, Marla had already emailed the draft notices. I reviewed them from my home office, the same one Carl once joked was a cute little hobby room. I stared at the digital signature box. One click. That's all it would take. Then, I texted Noah back. Working late. We'll talk tomorrow. Love you. Short. Cold. Necessary. Because by 10 a.m. tomorrow, Carl Whitmore was going to learn something he never bothered to consider. The nobody he dismissed was the only reason he still had a business to brag about. And when I withdrew the money, everything, loans, permits, contracts, would collapse. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. And if he couldn't give it to me in dignity, then I would take it back in silence. By 7 a.m., I was seated at my glass-top desk, a black coffee cooling beside my laptop, the Washington skyline still draped in early morning haze outside my window. The silence in the room felt like the calm before a surgical strike. My inbox blinked with one unread email from Marla. Subject line: withdrawal documents, final draft, signature ready. I clicked it open. 3 documents. One for the bank, one for the Whitmore Legal Counsel, and one to formally notify the city permitting office of my company's withdrawal as principal investor. It was surgical, swift, and absolutely legal. Carl had no idea that every contract he'd signed over the last year contained an at-will investor exit clause standard in my deals. He had relied on my money, my connections, and my influence with city developers, but never once thought to ask who I was. Because, of course, no woman sitting quietly at his family dinners could ever be the one holding the real power. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Noah again. Can we talk before you do anything drastic? I didn't respond. At exactly 9:30, I picked up the phone and dialed Marla. Send the documents, I said simply. All of them, she asked, voice tight. Yes. I want Carl's lawyer to receive the notice first. Then text Noah at 10 a.m. sharp. Send Carl my message last. There was a long pause on the line. And what should the message say? I stared out the window, watching a flock of birds fly past the spire of the old Capital Trust building, a project Whitmore Ventures had tried to buy 2 years ago, and failed miserably until my money quietly sealed the deal. Tell him, I said, not to underestimate trash. I hung up. At 10 a.m. on the dot, Carl Whitmore's carefully curated empire began to buckle. I imagined the panic as his lawyer opened the email, eyes scanning the legal withdrawal notice. The bank would follow minutes later, calling about collateral and bridge financing. Then the city permits would be flagged for non-compliance due to lack of investor backing. By 10:07, my phone buzzed. Noah. I answered, keeping my voice calm. Hey. His voice was ragged. Erin. What the hell is going on? You got my text? I asked. He exhaled hard. You're the investor. The anonymous partner Dad's been talking about this whole time, that's you? Yes. But, Erin, that investor put over $2 million into Ashcroft. You're not just a finance consultant. You own the firm. I own EB Partners, I said, standing now, pacing slowly across the floor. I started it after grad school. I manage portfolios worth over $70 million. There was silence on the other end, long and heavy. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Dad's been talking about you this whole time. Bragging about his brilliant investor who gets the vision. He's been calling you a genius. I smiled bitterly. And last night, that same man told me I was a nobody in front of his entire family. I heard him sit down, probably at his desk. He's going to lose everything, isn't he? Yes. Ashcroft was leveraged to cover his loans on the Kent Bridge and Timberline properties. Once the permits fall through, the loans default. He has about 60 days before foreclosure begins. Erin, this will ruin him. I didn't speak. Noah's voice softened. He's my father. I turned, staring at the framed photo of our wedding day on the bookshelf, me in my sleeveless white dress, smiling next to Carl, who hadn't even bothered to look at the camera. That was his way. Smile when the world was watching. Belittle when it wasn't. I know he's your father, I said finally. But he made it clear I would never be his family. My phone buzzed again. It was Carl. I didn't answer. Another text followed seconds later. This has to be a mistake. Call me immediately. Then another. Erin, I need to explain. There was a misunderstanding last night. I showed the messages to Noah during our video call. There's no misunderstanding, I said. He called me trash. Now he's about to find out how valuable that trash really was. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I was still on the call with Noah when I opened it. Carl stood there red-faced, breathing hard, his expensive overcoat askew. Behind him, Lillian hovered awkwardly. Noah had apparently rushed over as well. Erin, Carl started. We need to talk. Now. I stepped aside, not out of kindness, but because I wanted him to sit and watch his empire burn from my living room couch. He stormed in, pulling off his gloves like a man preparing for a fight. You can't just pull out. Do you have any idea what this does to the project? To my reputation? You mean the project I funded? I asked coolly. The one that was drowning in unpaid contractors and expired permits before I stepped in? That project. Carl blinked. You were EB Partners, he asked. I nodded. Every check. Every contract. Every connection. That was me. No, he breathed. No. That's not possible. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and turned the screen toward him. On it, my business profile glowed in high resolution. Erin Bennett, founder and CEO, EB Partners Strategic Commercial Investment. His face drained of color. You've been the investor, he whispered. This whole time. I've been the investor you praised to your colleagues. The one you thanked in speeches. The one who made sure you could keep pretending you were still relevant. Noah walked in slowly behind him. Dad, he said, gently, Erin's been helping you for over a year. Carl sank into the chair, hands shaking. I stood in front of him. And last night, you looked at me like I was something you scraped off your shoe. He didn't respond. You said your son deserved better, I added. Maybe he does. But not because of your judgment. Carl sat motionless on my living room sofa, the weight of the truth pressing his shoulders into a slow collapse. For once, the man had no words. The same Carl Whitmore who filled rooms with stories, who shook hands too tightly, who demanded attention like air, now sat as if the world had tilted underneath him. I watched him. No rage. No satisfaction. Just the clarity of knowing he finally saw me not as Noah's wife, but as the woman holding his future in her hands. You can't do this, he said at last, voice hoarse. You'll ruin everything. No, Carl, I replied, folding my arms. You did that last night. All I'm doing is letting it happen. His lips parted in protest, but he didn't speak. He didn't have to. The phone in his pocket buzzed, again and again, vibrating through his coat. Contractors, lawyers, maybe even a panicked bank officer by now. I imagined the ripple effect spreading, halted invoices, frozen disbursements, and whispers among the developers that Carl Whitmore had finally lost his touch. Behind him, Noah stood with hands buried in his jacket pockets, his face unreadable. Erin, Noah began. Maybe we can work something out. Maybe Dad just spoke his mind. I cut in. Told the room what he really thinks of me. Noah flinched. Carl looked up, eyes red. I didn't know. If I had known. You would have still treated me like furniture, I said flatly. You think respect is transactional. That power belongs only to men who built things with their hands, not women who build quietly behind closed doors. You wouldn't have respected me. You just wouldn't have insulted me where the investors could hear. He stood, trying to recover his authority. We can fix this. I'll make a statement. We'll say there was a miscommunication. There was no miscommunication, I snapped. There was a hierarchy. One you built, one you live inside. And now it's crumbling. His face twisted. Do you have any idea how many families rely on those projects? Pulling out doesn't just hurt me, it hurts workers, tenants, people waiting for housing. And whose fault is that? I asked. You built your empire on a single investor's back and never even bothered to learn her name. You didn't diversify your capital. You didn't secure independent financing. You assumed, like always, that someone else would carry you. Carl's jaw clenched. The flicker of rage returned, but it wasn't fire anymore, it was ash. He reached into his coat, pulling out his phone. The screen glowed with a dozen missed calls. This is still salvageable, he muttered to himself. We'll restructure. There are banks. Other investors. I can. No, I said. You can't. Because I've already spoken to the city. His eyes shot to mine. The permits you were so proud of? The fast-tracked approvals? That wasn't you, Carl. That was me. My connections. My name. I called in favors for Ashcroft Park. Without me, your paperwork goes to the bottom of the pile. Every inspection delayed. Every approval revoked. Carl staggered back as if I had struck him. Noah finally stepped forward, quiet but firm. Dad. Erin's right. You never gave her a chance. You mocked her business, mocked her role in this family, and now you're shocked she won't save you again. Carl looked between us, his voice breaking. I was protecting you, Noah. You married beneath you. And I married the woman who saved your legacy, Noah replied coldly. Silence bloomed. Carl sat down again, but slower this time, as though weighed down by the invisible math of consequence. 2 hours later, the news began to break. Ashcroft Park project delayed indefinitely after principal investor withdraws funding. Whitmore Ventures under scrutiny amid capital collapse. Every update hit Carl like a physical blow. I watched from across the room as his expression cycled: shock, disbelief, fury, denial. Lillian had arrived during the worst of it, her cheeks pale beneath her makeup. She stood in the corner, clutching her purse like a life raft. She finally spoke. Erin, please. He didn't mean it. You know how he gets. I turned to her. He meant every word. That's the problem. She blinked. But we're family. No, I replied. You all watched him humiliate me last night and said nothing. That's not family. That's complicity. Noah sat at the edge of the sofa, elbows on knees. Erin, he said softly, what happens next? I don't know, I said honestly. But I won't be the family's silent wallet anymore. Carl stood again, anger coiling in his fists. Fine, he spat. You've made your point. You win. Enjoy it. This wasn't about winning, I said quietly. It was about being seen. He turned to leave. But before he stepped outside, I added, oh, and I've already accepted meetings with 3 other developers. They treat their investors with respect. They'll be just fine without me playing house at their dinner tables. Carl didn't reply. The door slammed behind him. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Carl's business manager called twice, trying to verify the withdrawal. I confirmed. His lawyers emailed, requesting clarification. I declined. By 6 p.m., Carl's name was trending locally for all the wrong reasons. The fallout wasn't just financial, it was public. The man who had spent decades controlling his image had finally exposed the one truth he couldn't spin. His contempt had cost him everything. Noah sat with me that evening, silent. He looked wrecked, not because of what I'd done, but because of what he'd realized. I never asked, he said finally. About your business. About what you do. I thought I knew. I just assumed. I nodded. You assumed I didn't need credit. That I didn't want it. But we all want to be known, Noah. Especially by the people we love. He reached for my hand. I want to know you now. I let him hold it. For now. 2 days passed. Carl Whitmore's empire, once propped up by glossy brochures and bravado, was now the subject of headlines, phone calls, and whispered conversations in every real estate circle in DC. The man who had built his brand on invincibility had become a cautionary tale almost overnight. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my home office, reading between the lines of news articles and LinkedIn updates. Contractors pulled out. Investors froze. City offices retracted pending permits. Even Carl's oldest allies stopped answering his calls. In real estate, perception is currency. And Carl had just overdrafted. My phone buzzed early on Thursday morning. Noah. I let it ring. He sent a message a few minutes later. Mom's asking if you'll meet with Dad. Just for coffee. Not doing well. I stared at the screen. My hands didn't shake. My pulse didn't race. I simply felt tired. So deeply, thoroughly tired of carrying people who only saw me when they needed to be saved. I typed. Tell her I'll think about it. I didn't mean it. Not really. But it was kinder than what I wanted to say. By noon, I had an email from one of my oldest development contacts, a woman named Carla Walsh. She ran a sustainable housing firm and had always treated me as an equal, never a name on a funding line. Her subject line made me smile. Saw the Whitmore headlines. Lunch. We met the next day. Carla didn't bring it up immediately, but when she did, she didn't gloat. You've always been the quiet one in the room, she said, swirling her iced tea. But this was thunder. I smiled. It wasn't about revenge. She leaned in. No. It was about dignity. I saw the video clip from the party. Someone posted it on Twitter. Carl called you a dressed-up nobody in front of 24 people. My stomach tightened. He said worse before that, I replied. But that was the moment I knew. I couldn't keep pretending. Carla nodded slowly. I have a new project coming up. Midtown. Mixed use, high visibility. We're partnering with the city on low-income integration and green certifications. We're looking for someone like you, not just for the money, but for the vision. I looked at her. You sure you want to work with a woman who just tanked DC's loudest developer? She grinned. That's exactly why I want to work with you. That night, Noah came home late. He hadn't been staying at his parents' since the incident, partly because Carl couldn't look at him, and partly because Lillian had retreated into silence. He walked into our condo slowly, like someone entering unfamiliar territory. I saw Mom today, he said, dropping his keys. She says Dad hasn't left his office. Won't return calls. He's spiraling. I sat on the couch, laptop open on my lap. Noah, I said carefully, I need you to hear this. I didn't do this to destroy him. I did it because he destroyed the last ounce of respect I had for him. He rubbed his eyes. I know. I keep thinking about that night. How I didn't say anything. Silence grew between us. You didn't, I said quietly. You didn't stand up for me. His head dropped. I was shocked. Embarrassed. I froze. And then when I looked around and saw everyone else just staring at their plates, I convinced myself it would blow over. It didn't. No, he whispered. It blew up instead. We sat in silence for a while. The kind that comes after a storm, when everything is broken but strangely clear. 2 weeks later, the front page of the Washington Business Ledger carried a single, brutal headline. Whitmore Ventures files for bankruptcy after investor withdrawal. Crown Jewel project officially cancelled. The article included a side column about EB Partners, citing unconfirmed reports that a female investor had orchestrated a silent exit that triggered the collapse. No name was mentioned. It didn't matter. The industry knew. Word travels faster than paper. Carl became radioactive. Meetings were cancelled. Calls were dodged. Investors backed out of even legacy partnerships. No one wanted to be associated with a man who called his lead investor trash and lost his empire for it. But the worst part, The industry laughed. Quietly. Privately. But they laughed. Not because he failed. But because the man who once spoke with such superiority about real businessmen had been saved and then sunk by the very woman he dismissed. 3 weeks later, Carl reached out directly. Not through Noah. Not through Lillian. Not through his lawyers. Just a simple message, late at night. Erin. I was wrong. I see that now. Please. Let's talk. Just the two of us. I read it 3 times. Then I deleted it. No reply. By the 4th week, the Whitmores had lost their estate in McLean. It was leveraged against 2 failed projects and auctioned off to a hedge fund looking for distressed luxury properties. I saw the listing. I didn't smile. But I didn't flinch either. Noah and I talked less. We slept in the same bed but on different sides of an emotional wall we hadn't figured out how to scale. He tried to bridge the gap: flowers, cooking dinner, small jokes. But the deeper truth hadn't changed. He loved me. But he had never seen me. And now that he did, I wasn't sure he knew what to do with that knowledge. One evening, he sat beside me, watching me respond to an email about a new urban revitalization project in Atlanta. Erin, he said. Would you ever forgive him? I closed my laptop. No, I said. I might move on. I might even stop being angry. But forgive. That's earned. And Carl hasn't earned it. He nodded. What about us? I looked at him. That depends, I said. Do you want a partner who disappears when things get uncomfortable? Or do you want a woman who will burn the house down if she's told she doesn't belong in it? His eyes met mine. He didn't look away this time. I want the woman who built the house. By the time October bled into November, Carl Whitmore had all but vanished from the city's business pulse. No updates. No statements. No comebacks. The last time his name appeared in any publication was a 3-sentence paragraph buried deep inside the Washington Chronicle. Sources confirm Carl Whitmore, former CEO of Whitmore Ventures, is no longer pursuing development leadership roles and has stepped down from all affiliated projects. It wasn't a resignation. It was a disappearance. And just like that, the man who once treated silence as a weapon was swallowed by it. Lillian invited me to a family dinner shortly after that. A smaller affair this time, just her, Noah's sisters, and a few cousins. No photographers. No speeches. No Carl. I almost declined. Then I thought about every moment I had sat at those dinners, smiling politely while being ignored, dismissed, patronized. Every time Carl made some joke about career wives who think PowerPoint slides count as real work, or when Lillian would chime in gently, Erin, dear, maybe let the men discuss the business side. I decided to go. This time, I didn't wear beige. I walked into that brownstone in Georgetown wearing a midnight blue blazer and slacks sharp enough to slice open the atmosphere. Noah was already there, talking with his younger sister, Maya. The moment I stepped into the room, conversation stuttered. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. Power changes your posture, even when you're not trying. Lillian approached quickly, wine glass trembling ever so slightly. Erin, she said softly. I'm glad you came. I looked her in the eye. Are you? She faltered, then nodded. I owe you an apology. We all do. Maya stepped forward. We didn't know. Not just about your company. About how much you were doing. About what he was doing to you. No one asked, I replied simply. That's always been the problem. They didn't argue. For once, the Whitmore family didn't try to justify or soften or explain away the rot in their own roots. And for once, I felt something that resembled grace. Later that evening, as we sat with our glasses of wine and Lillian offered a tray of lemon tartlets, the topic finally came up. How is he? Someone asked. Lillian was quiet. Then, Carl spends most of his time in his study now. Watches old tapes of city council meetings. Writes letters to editors that he never sends. His, not the man he was. That wasn't quite true. He was exactly the man he had always been. The only difference was that now the world saw it too. Is he sorry? I asked. Lillian didn't answer for a long time. He's sorry he lost, she finally said. But I don't think he understands why. After that night, Noah and I tried. We really did. We went to therapy. We started having dinner together again, real dinner, not takeout containers left cooling between laptop chargers. He made an effort, small things, like asking about my deals, really listening when I answered. But trust doesn't rebuild itself on good intentions alone. One night, I asked him, "Why didn't you stand up that night? When your father called me a nobody?" He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't know how. He's always been like that. My whole life. Loud. Commanding. I was taught not to challenge him. But you weren't a child that night, Noah, I said. You were my husband. That landed harder than I expected. His mouth parted, but nothing came out. And that was the problem. It always had been. Carl shouted. The rest of them stayed quiet. And I had built an empire in that silence. The day I received confirmation of my latest acquisition, a 200,000 square foot property in Arlington with plans to house 3 tech startups, I didn't tell anyone. I sat in my office, opened the email, read the contract 3 times, and smiled. Not because I had one, but because I had finally stopped asking for permission to be powerful. My assistant came in a few minutes later. "There's someone here to see you. Says he doesn't have an appointment, but..." She looked uncertain. "It's Carl Whitmore." I paused, closed my laptop, then said, "Send him in." Carl entered like a man out of place. He looked older, smaller. His suit, once tailored to his swagger, now hung loose around his shoulders. His eyes were tired in a way I hadn't seen before, not exhaustion, but erosion. He sat when I gestured, carefully, like the chair might reject him. "I didn't come to beg," he said after a moment. "Good," I replied. "I came to thank you. And to curse you." I tilted my head. "You destroyed me," he said. "And I deserved it. But I hate that it had to be you." I met his gaze. "Because I'm a woman?" "No," he said slowly. "Because I didn't see you coming. And because you were right." He looked around my office, the high windows, the dry erase board with projected figures, the plaque on the wall from the city honoring my work in affordable housing expansion. "I thought I built an empire," he said. "Turns out, I just inherited one and coasted." I didn't respond. "I came here because I needed to say this in person," he continued. "You weren't trash. You were gold, Erin. And I threw you away like scraps." There was silence again. Heavy. Final. Then he stood. "I won't ask for your forgiveness. I wouldn't give it either. But I hope someday you'll remember that I told the truth. Even if it came too late." He walked to the door. "Carl," I said, stopping him. He turned. "If you had said this a year ago," I said, "maybe things would have been different." He nodded once. "If I had said this a year ago, I'd still have everything. And you'd still have nothing." He left. Carl's visit left a strange stillness in my office. Not cold. Not even tense. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes when a storm has passed and you realize you're still standing, not untouched, but stronger for the way the wind peeled you open. He had come to admit he'd been wrong, and in doing so, confirmed something I had always known. People like Carl don't fall because you push them. They fall because they build themselves too high on borrowed scaffolding and never notice the cracks beneath them until it's far too late. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel joy either. Mostly, I felt done. 3 days later, Noah and I sat across from each other at our dining table, the air thick with the weight of unspoken decisions. 2 wine glasses between us. Dinner barely touched. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about us." I didn't look up. "I used to believe that love was enough," he continued. "That if we were kind to each other, worked through things, Stuck together, it would carry us through. Isn't that what love's supposed to do? I asked. He exhaled. Maybe. But not if it becomes a place where one person shrinks to make the other comfortable. I finally met his eyes. I let you shrink, he admitted. Not because I wanted to, but because it made things easier. Easier with my family. Easier with Carl. Easier for me to pretend that nothing was broken. I nodded, slowly. You didn't humiliate me, Noah. But you didn't stop it either. I know. We sat with that for a long moment. I still love you, he said. I know, I replied. But that's not the question anymore. I didn't leave that night. There wasn't a suitcase. No slamming doors. No final tearful goodbye. Instead, there was a gentle separation, the kind that begins when two people realize they're no longer growing in the same direction. We agreed to space. Time. Clarity. A month later, Noah moved into a downtown apartment near his new job at an urban development nonprofit. I stayed in the condo not because I was claiming it, but because it was the space I had built to reflect who I was. Who I had become. Alone didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt honest. In January, I was invited to speak at a real estate development summit in Chicago. The keynote panel was titled, Silent Partners No More, Women Behind the Deals. I nearly said no. But then I thought about every woman in that audience who had ever been called a nobody, a supportive wife, a nice girl with good instincts. I stood on that stage beneath chandeliers made of polished glass and told a story not just about finance and power plays, but about what happens when you stop asking for a seat at the table and start buying the damn table. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned quiet. Then applause. Then, for the first time in my life, I felt the kind of visibility that didn't come from revenge or exposure, but from truth. Real, earned, unapologetic truth. Carl emailed me once after that. The subject line read, "No response needed." Inside, a single line. "I learned more from your silence than I ever did from my own voice." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Sometimes dignity looks like walking away. Other times, it looks like never looking back. By early spring, I had expanded EB Partners into 3 new markets, Charlotte, Nashville, and Detroit, cities filled with both struggling communities and untapped potential. Carla Walsh joined as co-investor on a major urban redevelopment plan. For the first time, I wasn't just investing from the shadows. I was leading from the front. And the respect. It was no longer reluctant or surprised. It was expected. I had, without permission, become the person Carl always pretended to be. And I had done it on my own terms. One afternoon, I ran into Maya, Noah's sister, at a coffee shop in Adams Morgan. We hugged. She smiled, a little wistful. "You look different," she said. "Not just the clothes. Like, lighter. I feel different." She nodded. "I wish it hadn't gone the way it did." "I don't," I said softly. "It was the only way it could have." Maya looked down at her drink, then back up. "Dad's been reading a lot about legacy lately. Wants to write a book, apparently. Some kind of memoir." "Interesting," I said. "He mentioned you," she added. "Said the chapter about Ashcroft Park would be called The Woman Who Let Me Fall." I sipped my coffee. "No," I said. "It should be called The Woman Who Finally Let Go." In April, I hosted a private dinner for women investors and developers, no press, no boardrooms, no speeches. Just a long table, candlelight, real conversation. At the end of the night, one of the younger women, bright-eyed and nervous, came up to me and said, "I heard your story. The real one. About Carl. About what happened. You're kind of a legend." I smiled. "I'm not a legend," I said. "I'm just someone who stopped waiting to be respected." A week later, Noah and I sat on a bench at the National Gallery of Art. It was quiet. Peaceful. We hadn't seen each other in over a month. But when we met, there was no tension. Just two people who had shared something deep and real and who had also outgrown the shape they once fit inside. "How are you?" he asked. "Powerful," I said. He smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "I believe that." He reached over, touched my hand gently, then let it go. "I'll always love you," he said. "I know," I replied. We sat a while longer. Then stood. Then walked away. Not in anger. Not in pain. Just forward. 6 months after I walked out of Carl Whitmore's birthday dinner, I stood on the balcony of my new office, overlooking a stretch of the Potomac River. Below me, construction crews moved like a choreographed dance, cranes rising, concrete poured, steel beams climbing into the morning sky. What used to be a crumbling post-industrial block was now transforming into the Haven District, my latest urban revitalization project, part tech campus, part affordable housing, part community space. I named it Haven not just because it sounded poetic, but because that's what I had been building all along. Not just spaces. Not just investments. A place for people like me, underestimated, overlooked, unseen, to become undeniable. I hadn't spoken to Carl since that last visit to my office. From what I'd heard through industry whispers, he'd attempted a few quiet comebacks, low-level advisory roles, private consulting. None lasted long. The name Carl Whitmore had become synonymous with arrogance and recklessness, not vision or innovation. His name didn't open doors anymore. It closed them. Funny how reputations work, so long to build, so easy to burn. Noah and I had officially separated, though we remained cordial. There were no court battles, no venom, just two people who quietly acknowledged that love was never enough without respect, and that silence, when it matters most, is its own kind of betrayal. He eventually moved out to San Francisco for a new role in environmental planning. We still exchanged the occasional message, birthdays, holidays, simple check-ins like echoes of a life we once lived but could never return to. And I was okay with that. Because I had finally become someone who didn't just survive being overlooked, I had outgrown the very rooms that once tried to contain me. One afternoon, while meeting a potential design firm in DuPont Circle, the receptionist handed me a parcel. "No return address," she said. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a book. It was Carl's memoir. Self-published. The title? Foundations and Fault Lines, What I Built, What I Broke. I almost laughed. On the inside cover, there was a note handwritten in sharp, careful letters. "Erin. I told myself this book was about legacy. But it's really about regret. The kind you never stop carrying. You taught me more by walking away than I ever learned from winning. Carl." I closed the book and placed it gently back in the wrapping. I didn't need to read it. Because I already knew the ending. They had thrown me away like I was disposable. Like I was decoration at their table. Like I was someone who should smile quietly and feel grateful to be included. And now, Carl had no business. No empire. No legacy. What he did have, finally, was the truth. And as for me, I had something much better. I had a team of brilliant young analysts, women, men, queer, immigrant, first generation, first in their field, all of whom called me boss with pride. I had contracts in 3 cities and incoming proposals from 5 more. I had a seat at every table I walked into, not because someone offered it, but because I had bought the building. I had peace in the mornings, watching the sun hit my glass windows, knowing I never again had to make myself smaller to be accepted. I had my name on deeds, on award plaques, on articles about what the next generation of real estate leaders looked like. And I had my power, not the kind that shouts or demands, but the kind that simply is. Sometimes I think back to that dinner. To the exact moment Carl's voice cut through the room. "You're a dressed-up nobody. My son deserves better." And I smile. Because what Carl never realized, what none of them did, is that you don't have to raise your voice to be dangerous. You don't have to throw a tantrum to shift the ground. Sometimes, you just stand up, place your napkin gently on the table, and walk away. And that's enough to bring down the house. Epilogue. A year later, I stood on stage at the National Women in Real Estate Summit. Hundreds of seats. Dozens of lights. The woman introducing me read from the program. Our keynote today is Erin Bennett, CEO of EB Partners. She's been called one of the most influential urban investors in the country. But beyond her resume, Erin's story is a lesson in what happens when women refuse to stay invisible. Please welcome. As I stepped up to the microphone, I looked out at the crowd and saw reflections of myself in every face, the ambition, the exhaustion, the fire, the hunger to be more than just supportive. I took a breath, smiled, and began. Not because I needed the spotlight, but because I had finally stopped asking for permission to shine.